Hello everybody, welcome back to the second of our 3 or 4 human rights videos. And look at this for a beautiful illustration. That's Eleanor Roosevelt, of course, with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights printed out onto a large poster in her hands. We thought about the human rights basics in our last video. Now we're going to be putting these concepts into practice, specifically relating them to social work. Has this been happening for a long time? Interestingly, no. It's worth noting you have to do a bit of work to put social work and human rights together. Traditionally, social work training included modules in psychology, sociology, law, but not human rights. Now, this is changing. I actually give a module on human rights and social work in one of the universities where I teach in Paderborn. But this isn't really a standard part of social work training. Also, the discipline of human rights has been dominated by particular disciplines itself, typically philosophy, law, and political science, but not social work. So it's kind of interesting. Human rights and social work don't have as close a tie as you may expect them to. The United Nations wished to change this something like 25 years ago in 1994. And they put together this paper here. It's something like 60 sides, Human Rights and Social Work, a manual for schools of social work and the social work profession. So effectively, this was notes produced by the United Nations designed for social work educators to encourage them to use the human rights concept in social work training. And it prompted a range of human rights social work literature. In fact, there really are many books I could cite here. The perspectives in these books vary. Some focus on international practice, so some really are zooming in on, say, the global South countries. Others relate to Western context, typically that of the author's country, so they might relate, say, to US social work. And that they really are a rich bunch of books. I really can recommend dipping into these. In fact, one of them, the last, I'm going to investigate further in my next video. Human rights for our everyday lives. I've got a really famous quote here from the thinker we had on our first slide from Eleanor Roosevelt. Look at this, a famous statement of human rights back from 1958. Where, after all, do human rights begin? In small places, close to home. So close and so small that they cannot be seen on any map of the world. Yet they are the world of the individual person, the neighborhood he lives in, the school or college he attends, the factory, farm, or office where he works. Such are the places where every man, woman, and child seeks equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity without discrimination. Unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere. So it's a famous quote. Why is it interesting for us? Discuss with your partner. Why is this quote, Eleanor Roosevelt, 1958, why is it interesting for us social workers? I think it's exciting because she's encouraging us to think of human rights in the context of our everyday realities, our own life worlds, the places where we spend our typical days. So taking the lead from Roosevelt, let's think about protecting human rights in people's homes, in private places in people's homes. At our workplace, maybe it's the children's department, maybe it's a children's home, maybe it's a hospital, maybe it's a school. In our studies, at the university, and in our team, with our clients, speaking to our boss and to our colleagues. Think of human rights in the context of your everyday. I'm going to give you some approaches to human rights, and one particular approach which I want to start off with is the idea of the concrete rights that we have printed down in legal documents. So one approach to social workers' human rights work is to relate social work practice to concrete human rights, as listed, as worded in the Universal Declaration, the various conventions we mentioned in the last presentation, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and so on. So we take these conventions, we take the Universal Declaration, and we get inspired by the formulations within these documents. And one of the books I was waving a moment ago, this particular author here, Androff, he uses such an approach when discussing, say, work with children and families. He looks at what conventions are relevant here. He draws attention to particular separate articles within them. And this is my next question for you with your neighbour. What do you think of this approach? How do you find the idea of us being inspired by the concrete legal formulations in the international human rights documents? Pause and natter with your partner. What did you think about it? I mean, there's no right or wrong answer here. Some people like this approach, some people don't. It's worth noting, by doing so, we're kind of reducing human rights to lists, you know, to specific lists of rights, concrete rights in particular places. Some would criticize that. Some would say there's a kind of reduction involved there. We're reducing social work of human rights, which is so diverse and rich, to thinking about particular lists, lists of entitlements, lists of freedoms. On the other hand, others would say, no, it's a helpful approach. It can help you to focus yourself on the key orientation points. And I do find this a valid point as well. Having the concrete rights available as simple, easy to understand rights, that can also empower clients. You know, I've got kids, and it's fascinating to tell children what their children's rights are. It's fascinating to draw their attention to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of a Child and to say to them, look, you have this right here, you have this right here. And they say, I didn't know that. I had no idea. Do I have that right? Okay. So that can be very, very empowering and very emancipating as well. An exercise for you guys: which articles of the Convention on the Rights of a Child are relevant to social work with children? You know, seek out that document, you'll quickly find it on the internet, have a quick read. Which articles are particularly relevant to our everyday practice? And when you look at it, you'll find you can easily grab a whole bunch with your partner. Try to identify 5 or 6 that really are the big ones. They immediately make you think of concrete social work situations. Well, I did that exercise, and I noticed a couple were particularly important for my interactions with the child. And I'm going to zoom in on these 2 articles right now. I want you to think about participation with children in our social work. Now, children must be allowed and encouraged to participate in all questions around their care. You know, they're allowed to have a say on their lives. So with your partner, discuss the following question: how could you involve children in social work, inspired by the following articles from the Convention on the Rights of the Child? We've got Article 12, states parties shall assure to the child the right to express those views freely in all matters affecting the child. And then 2, for this purpose, the child shall in particular be provided the opportunity to be heard, either directly or through a representative or an appropriate body. And then it continues in Article 13, the child shall have the right to freedom of expression. This right shall include freedom of speech, receive and impart information and ideas, either orally, in writing or in print, in the form of art, or through any other media. As you can see, I've left a lot out of these articles. You know, there's lots of dots there. I've shortened them radically, but I think I've shortened them in such a way that you might be inspired by that. So have a think about that. You're working with a child in some classic children and family social work situation. How might those articles inspire you? I mean, I find them amazingly inspiring, thinking about participation, thinking about involvement. In terms of individual work with children, the Convention on the Rights of a Child, it grants the child extensive rights to be listened to. And it explicitly lists different support for the communication around this listening. You know, this is the bit which I find really, really interesting. So if you're interacting with your child or your children, you know, your communication is not just going to be verbal, me asking you questions and you answering. Projects might involve seeking children's opinions, getting feedback from children on, we can use art, we can use drama, computers, we can use smartphones. I'm thinking of the media expression there. We can use stories, you know, so when we think about the diversity of communication channels, which is explicitly in the convention, you know, it makes us be creative. Moreover, the spirit of those extracts, you know, the need to listen to the child is the expert on their life world. You know, this is an insight that we had. We know we'd known it for a long time, particularly if we were professionals working with children, but it was explicitly outlined in that document at the end of the 1980s. Children are the experts on their world. You know, you have to listen to them. So it challenges the idea of the social worker as being the expert, or the social work lecturer, or whoever. This is a new idea of the expert. I think it's exciting. I think it's really stimulating. Good. The UN Universal Declaration, that's the starting point of all of this. That dates from the late 1940s. It's an early post-war achievement. What other human rights documents date from this period? There you are, German students. There's a question for you. Pause here and natter with your partner. Did you get the answer? I was thinking, I mean, I'm sure there's other answers, but I was thinking of our German constitution, our Grundgesetz, which is also interesting and a kind of basis document for social workers too. Moving on to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. As I've just said right now, that was shaped by discourses in the 1980s. So that was the accumulation of 1980s discussions of the rights of children. Signed 2nd of September 1989. The 1980s discourses around this convention influenced national social work practice strongly. Can you see any evidence of this influence in your country? I'll give you a clue. Maybe thinking of laws in your country. Pause here and natter with your partner. Very easy to answer if you're German. We had our Kinder- und Jugendhilfegesetz, Germany 1990, again, very much a result of those discourses, very much from the energy of those discourses and the spirit, the way of looking at children as actors with agency. Brits also had a parallel law, basically exactly the same timing. We reformed our services at the same time, the Children Act 1989. There you are. I'm going to come to a close by giving you a case study to chew on as a last exercise. Consider the following case. Can a consideration of human rights documents, like the ones we've just looked at, can they help us to think about appropriate action? And again, you can use the United Nations documents, the conventions and so on. You can also use the German Grundgesetz or the German social work law, which we've just discussed. Lena, age 23, she has depression for which she is receiving treatment. She lives with her 3-year-old daughter, Anna. Social services have concerns that the child is suffering from neglect and are considering removing the child from her mother's care. Lena is aware of this and she's frightened of losing her child. Lena seems not to have noticed that her daughter is losing weight, has nits, and is spending most of her time playing alone in their dirty flat. Her language skills are that of a 2-year-old rather than a child of her actual age. So that's a sketch of a case. Thinking about human rights legislation, thinking about our own law in Germany, how can we be inspired? You know, what could we think about doing with this family? How could we help them? How could we support them? I'm going to come to a close for now. Once again, there's a further reading. I'm recommending this book, which I was inspired by thinking about this legalistic approach. In my next presentation, we'll be having a different approach to the same topic, human rights social work. Let me click on stop and come to a close here. Thanks.